Hey guys, welcome to another day of summer school ELA. Very early on, actually your first writing assignment for this summer, I had you guys write about your summer experience. I called it your summer story or my summer story. I think that was task 2, one of the very first things you did during our time together. What I want to do now is I want to take a look at that again. When I ask you to write your summer story, I ask you to write about an experience that you guys, a memorable experience that you all have had in some previous summer, or it could have even been this summer. So any previous experience that you had that was memorable related to summer. And I didn't specifically ask for narrative or any type of genre like inform, explain, or narrative format. And we hadn't even learned narrative format at that point. So I wasn't asking for anything specific. I just wanted you to write freely about it. So I want to share with you guys what I wrote. And I want to emphasize that when we write about an experience like that, we will naturally include, without even knowing about the story arc or the narrative structure that we've talked about, any of that stuff, we will naturally adopt a narrative type format, but we also will adopt elements of other types of writing formats such as inform, explain. So let's take a look at my summer story, which I retitled My Summer Adventure. As you go through these, eventually you're going to be retitling all of these. Even if I give it a generic title like My Summer Story, that's fine for a point of reference and to get you started. But and my title was originally that as well. Originally, this said My Summer Story, but I changed it to My Summer Adventure. I can even change this title, and likely would, as I continue through the drafting and editing process. But for now, that'll suffice. It gets it a little bit more specific to what I want to talk about. Now, as we read through this, I want to be clear that it's not a story per se. I'm describing an experience, and it's more descriptive. It's more me just giving you information about my summer memory. What we're going to do though, and if you wrote something similar to this, and I know some of you did, then that's fine. Whatever you have might be closer to a narrative, or it might be even less like a narrative than even this. My summer adventure that I'm going to read to you now has elements of a narrative, as you'll see. In fact, you'll readily identify some of them just based on having read the one story that we did and having looked at a couple of the other narratives and all the lessons we've had on narrative structure. You'll recognize that. But what I'm going to do with this, and what I'm going to ask you to do, is turn your summer story experience, memory, into a narrative. Okay. So for me, as the last of the four tires on my mom's white 1980 Oldsmobile pulled off my grandmother's half grass, half gravel driveway and onto the street, I knew my summer stay had officially begun. In each summer of my early teens, my parents sent me to my grandmother's house for an extended stay, and this summer was the first of those stays. It was for 3 weeks, and this was my first time away from home for such a length of time. As I watched my mom drive off, I felt a nervous anticipation. What would I do for 3 weeks? There was no swimming pool, no video games, no parents, no sisters. I have to. This was before cell phones and social media. As I watched my mom drive off, I was thinking, did I make a mistake coming here? I won't see her for 21 days. Stupid me. Okay, notice this entire first paragraph is more or less written in narrative structure format. I'm giving you an exposition. I'm including a description, a setting. I'm giving you a sense of setting. Just the fact that I'm talking about, the type of vehicle it was and the fact it was half gravel driveway. You're getting the sense that this happened a long time ago, that it happened in a more or less rural setting, not not in one of the neighborhoods or subdivisions in Maricopa where you probably wouldn't have a half grass, half gravel driveway. It's a rural setting. So notice again, we talk about show versus tell. The fact that I'm talking about half grass, half gravel driveway, and onto the street tells you right there without even me having to tell you. It shows you that this is a rural setting. The fact that we're talking about this 1980 Oldsmobile gives you a sense that this is not something that happened yesterday or a couple years ago. This was some time ago. And then all the exposition of talking about me being in my early teens, going to visit my grandmother's house for an extended stay, the first time I've been away from home, the things I was used to having that I no longer was. I'll give you a little bit of background about having two sisters, reminding you if you maybe so you take it for granted that you don't it doesn't even occur to you that this was a time before cell phones, social media, all of these things, and the fact that I was questioning coming here. So in a sense, this, to the extent that this is following a narrative format, this is kind of the conflict. But when I refine this or rewrite this, I'll change that around, but more on that later. Stupid me. No, lucky me. It turned out to be the most memorable 21 days of my life. My grandmother showered me with love and attention the only way a grandmother can. I had no chores. I had no to-do list. I had total freedom. Why did I have any doubts? Swimming pool? Who needs it? Video games? Are they really that much fun? At least in those days. Parents? What was that I said about no chores or to-do list? Sisters? Do I really need to answer that one? I could do whatever I wanted. I had it made. Endless food, soft drinks, and cable TV. A big deal in the early 80s. And my grandmother had channels that I could not get at home. I would watch baseball during the day, and when the sun went down at night, I would practice my perfect strike pitches on a building wall outside. At night, I got to sleep on an inflatable mattress. Speaking of night, it was during this first day that I pulled my first all-nighter, not sleeping until after the sun rose the next day. Life during my stay was an endless adventure, hence the title that I gave it, My Summer Adventure. And sometimes your titles will come to you through your writing. You know, you're not going to come up with the title in the very beginning. Your title is something that you'll come up with probably at the end, or you'll change an aspect of it or revise it based on what you're actually writing about. Let's see, where was I? Oh, here. It was an endless adventure. But what I enjoyed most was simply being with my grandmother. We had a chance to really get to know each other, and we developed a bond that would last the rest of her life. People are like places. You can visit a place and learn about it. However, if you really want to connect to a place, appreciate it, and fully understand it, you have to live there. I did not simply visit my grandmother, I lived with her, which led to a greater appreciation of her and her way of living. When my mom pulled up in our white Oldsmobile on the appointed day to pick me up, I was happy to see her. But I was sad knowing my adventure was at its end. I said bye to my grandmother, thanked her, and left her with an enthusiastic, "I'll be back next summer." On the drive back home, my mom reminded me of my chores and to-do list, and that my sisters missed me. Life was about to be back to normal. I was already missing my grandmother and my summer adventure. Okay, notice here that I'm ending the story with a reference to my title, which is always nice if you can bookend your writing talking about my summer adventure, and then that's actually an element that connects back to my title. So it gives it a nice kind of completion and parallel structure. Another thing you'll notice is, as I was, maybe you noticed it, I wasn't even purposely trying to do it. I was just kind of sort of conscious of it myself, is that when I was reading my story versus when I was reading Rouhani's story or any other story you'll hear me read, I had a little bit more I had a little bit more voice and expression. Why is that the case? Well, that's the case because it's my story. This is me telling you my story. I know what it's supposed to sound like. Your writing should sound like the way it should sound like your voice. So when I actually do a voiceover of my writing, I can convey that in a way that's very natural, very authentic, and very expressive. So that voice really comes through, and that's what I want for you guys. I want your voice to come through in your writing. So you'll notice, although this whole first paragraph has a nice narrative structure to it, pretty much everything that happens after that point until the last paragraph does not have a narrative structure. I'm not talking about, although I did mention the potential of what could be inferred as a conflict here, me thinking, did I make a mistake coming here? This is a conflict. This is a mental sort of state of mind that I'm trying to grapple with. Although that can very well be inferred as a conflict, there's no real clear steps that are being taken to outline the tension in a detailed fashion, working toward a climactic moment. Sure, there was at some point, there was a realization that, hey, I'm actually lucky to be here. And life during my stay is an endless adventure. And I had it made. So at some point, I had this realization. I had this tipping point where all this rising action and all this sort of me kind of going back and forth in my mind, well, no swimming pool, I miss my friends, I don't have my video games. And then that was kind of balanced out by all the things I had going for me. And at some point it hit a tipping point where it's like, you know what? I actually have it made, right? So that's kind of a climactic moment, but it's not super clear. And of course, we can imagine that the following action after that would be me just enjoying all these things and spending that time there. And another climactic moment was just the realization that, hey, this is really meaningful and a real meaningful and special experience because I simply enjoyed being with my grandmother. What I enjoyed most was being with my grandmother. All right, so that's why this doesn't fit narrative structure, is because I'm really more or less describing my experience and why that was meaningful to me, but I'm not really telling a story. I do get back into storytelling mode here a little bit, where this could be seen as more following action toward a resolution. A resolution meaning, hey, things are about to go back to normal in my life. I miss my grandmother, and this is an experience I'll never forget. All this to point out is when I rewrite this, what I want to do in our narrative is not just have this broad story that I'm talking about, where I'm just describing this whole 3-week experience within the span of, how many words do I have here? I think I have 350 words. Do a word count here in a second. Let me move this, get that information for you. I don't see it up here right now. It's not on my bar. But this story, I believe, was 350 words. So within the span of this story, I'm covering a whole 3 weeks. What we really want to do in narrative writing is we want to focus on one key event, one real narrow aspect, and then we want to broaden out that one thing. So perhaps it was the all-nighter that I pulled right here. So I could describe that and that whole experience. Or maybe I could describe some experience related to the things that we did, the people and places that we visited while I was there. Maybe I could come up with some story related to that. So you really want to narrow in on one aspect of the story for narrative purposes, and kind of like the checkpoint at the TSA. When Rohani was talking about her trip from wherever she was going to wherever her destination was, she made a brief reference to visiting her family and the Charlie Brown Christmas moment, but her entire story was focused around that one incident, that one, I'm sure it felt like 5 hours, but it was probably just 5 minutes, and maybe not even 5 minutes. It might have been just 3 minutes, where Rohani was dealing with all the emotions and tensions related to being held up at the security checkpoint and the immediate aftermath to that, and the overall realization and resolution related to that. So I want you guys, as you're rewriting your stories, to focus on one real narrow aspect. And as I rewrite mine, I'll share it with you. But focus on one narrow aspect of it that you can broaden out and tell a story about. If you have any questions, let me know. Please leave comments in the comment section, and I will see you guys later.